Hello, student. Today we'll be talking about Judith Butler's Is Kinship Always Already Heterosexual? We have been talking about this for last two classes. Today I'll try to summarize, not going through the nitty-gritty, but what actually this article means. And it would be, I am hoping it will be a very short lecture. The point, the context of this this article is that a French thinker actually questioned Judith Butler's position on gay marriage and how that is harmful for French society. So in response, actually, Butler clarifies her position. Why are we doing this? Why are we interested in this question? That is something that we must clarify at the beginning of the research. If you notice the way the course was outlined, we have been talking about alternative forms of kinship. We've been talking about the dismantling the traditional notion of kinship. We've been studying Charlene's work. We started with Engels' work, but we moved on to Charlene's What Kinship Is to have a broader perspective of how kinship should be studied. We studied elementary form, but then again we talked about 21st century kinship. Then we saw the relationship or forced relationship by anthropologists with kinship and economy to understand non-Western society. Moving away from that, and also we have read bits and pieces of Schneider's debate, why kinship is not viable or conventionally studied anymore, and what happens with certain articulation. Here, Butler's work is making us question two things. One is the heterosexual assumption of kinship, what kind of roles and responsibility or privileges we automatically gather by being or by choosing to be part of this recognizable kinship, by being part of this recognizable kinship pattern, and how it is very different from homosexual couples, and more interestingly, what it means for demanding recognition for gay marriage or homosexual marriages, and what kind of rights it curtails for homosexual people. So it is, and what impact it has on alternative kinship. So these are some questions that we will be discussing today. So Butler starts her Butler starts their argument with how gay marriage and gay kinship is not the same thing. They start from there, but how in USA both gay marriage and kinship are confounded. And what happens is that anything which is not heterosexual marriage, the kinship that exists outside the heterosexual norms are not recognized. So we see that kinship in American society, and by saying kinship in American society, I also recognize that there are, like, the kinship differs, the form differs according to class, status, race, and all of this, ethnicity, more importantly. But here, what legally American kinship is thought of, that is the articulation of that lexicon that we will go for. So basically, in legal way, in an American legal system, kinship is essentially is organized in service to reproductive rights. So if you are having reproductive right, if you are capable of having legal status for family, only then it would be considered as a kinship. Otherwise, it's not. Now, the challenge is that this is not the only way of um, counting lineage, right? There, locally and internationally, there have been very different kinds of kinship practices that we have already studied so far. If we consider kinship practices as the negotiation between the reproductive right and also demand of the death, then kinship is actually taking care of the most vulnerable moment of human being. It actually, kinship is in service for the vulnerable moment of birth and death and getting old, or basically illness, and then generational ties, dying, death, and all of this, right? So these are the things that kinship addresses, then kinship is not automatically uh, do not have this autonomous sphere proclaiming to be distinct from community and friendship. And we see how Schneider actually talks about the capacity of formalize and track in the conventional ways of ethnologists in past, and how they have attempted to actually record kinship that is not viable anymore. But in recent anthropology and sociology, there has been renewed interest in kinship, and the kinship actually disjointed from the assumption of marriage in many of the kinship studies. One of the work Butler talks about is Carol Stack's All Our Kin, where kinship functions actually sustained through the network of women. These women can be your kin member or might not be even related to you. Similarly, the work of Nathaniel Mackey and Fred Morton shows how the African American kinship relationship has become focus of this new studies of kinship, where disposition of kin relationship by slavery offered continuing legacy of wounded kinship. And actually, Saidiya Hartman talks about how kinship study is also haunted by the ghost of what you call the slavery. But by seeing that, we also have to remember that these kinships are highly scrutinized and highly surveilled because of the slavery, because of the blackness. And as a result, it is not possible to separate the question of kinship from the property relationship. The fiction of bloodline actually is of state interest and racial interest. Now, the work that we see, which actually is kind of standing away from how we understand kinship, is by Kat Weston. So Kat Weston. Kat's work actually is talking about, it actually records or document the lives of a gay and lesbian non-material kinship relationship that emerge outside of the heterosexual based family ties, and which is and this relationship are chosen, because this the very title talks about the family that we choose, and then it offers us a glimpse of how how actually alternative kinship can work or does work. In Chai Hua's work, we see that among the Na of China, uh, Chai Hua actually criticized Levi-Strauss's work and talks about how Na's life was misconstrued in this earlier ethnography, and where husband or father figures prominently in as not at all a factor to determine the kinship. Marriage has also recently been separated from the question of kinship in extent that gay marriage legislative proposal exclude rights of adoption. So basically, if you are talking about gay marriage, you are like recognition for gay marriage, you are okay to give up your rights of adoption, entitlement of marriage. So these have not only taken place in Germany and France, but also in US. So it do not always have the direct impact on the family laws. So gay marriage essentially then becomes the symbolic recognition of dyadic relationship. Now, petition of gay marriage right seeks to solicit state recognition for non-heterosexual heterosexual union. So configures that state as withholding an entitlement that is really should distribute the right regardless of the sexual orientation. So the right that is as a human being, you are supposed to have the right to be united with anyone you choose. That should be your basic human rights. But the state already has a sanction certain kind of relationship to be in place. So normalizing power of the state are made especially clear when we consider how continuing quandaries about kinship both condition limits the marriage debate. What do we mean by that? Basically, you are accepting the recognition of state by giving up your basic rights. So you are picking and choosing what right you are entitled to have and what right you are entitled to give up, or not entitled, or choose to give up. So the thing is, so Butler, what she does, what they do is they actually looks into this quandary of kinship and marriage in order to show how the argument in favor of legal alliance can work in tandem with the state normalization of recognizable of kinship relationship, a condition that extend rights of contract while in no way disrupting the patrilineal assumption of kinship project of unified nation that it supports. Now the thing is like, so Butler is essentially saying that by like having this recognition doesn't pose question of the heterosexual union. It doesn't really disrupt the way state envision family, marriage, and kinship. It doesn't put any resistance whatsoever. So state is not this same state in each of these bits, and we ask for intervention by the state in one domain of marriage, only to suffer excessive regulation in another domain, which is kinship. So basically, by achieving the recognition, you are essentially allowing state to scrutinize your kinship, how your other relationship should be dictated by the state. So it's okay to turn to marriage, make it thus more difficult to argue in favor of the viability of alternative kinship arrangement and the well-being of the child in any number of social forms. So basically what happens is that when you accept this kind of relationship, you are actually foregoing the possibility that you could ever adopt or have your own child and their well-being. You are then denouncing that right, and you are also also foreclosing the possibility of what a relationship could be other than marriage. Now, gay marriage, and the next section talks about the gay marriage and desire of the state and desire and the eclipse of sexuality. This part is pretty straightforward. The arguments are pretty straightforward because gay marriages obviously draws upon profound abiding investment, not only in the heterosexual couple per se, but in the question of what form of relationship, what ought to be legitimated by the state. So it's very interesting because it's not only the marriage, gay, queer relationship, and early queer rights movement, gay rights movement, or lesbian rights movement, homosexuality and homosexual relationship actually was opted for its progressive positioning, which would actually allow them to have the sexual freedom to choose, sexual freedom to have a family they choose, and abide by their own personal rules and regulation rather than state imposed rules and regulation. That doesn't mean that they are not law abiding citizen, but they are actually pushing for equal rights to choose how to live, how to exist, the basic human rights. To be legitimate by the state is to enter into the term of legitimation offered there, and to find that one public and recognizable sense of personhood is fundamentally dependent on the lexicon of that legitimation. That means you are actually agreeing to get married so that you can be treated as a person. Like, you are not, like, does it mean that you are not a person, or you are actually don't feel that you exist without the marriage, without this recognition, or you don't think that you have the rights to exist without this marriage or without this recognition. So essentially, this recognition is not only about marriage, but about your own identity, about your own personhood. The sphere of legitimate intimate alliances is established through producing and intensifying the region of legitimacy. We misunderstood the sexual field as well. If we consider that the legitimate and illegitimate appear to exhaust its eminent possibilities. This is a field outside the juncture of legitimate and illegitimate. So sexual field is not about the legitimacy and illegitimacy. It's about the realm which is outside. It's not about legal or illegal, but the gray zone in between. A domain of sphere or field is not yet either legitimate or illegitimate, but needs to be, how you call it, a point of reference for ultimate desire, a point where you can articulate what you really want other than this or that. Marriage ought to be legitimately extended to the homosexual. That means that sexual field is circumscribed in such a way that sexuality is already thought in terms of marriage, and marriage is already thought in patches of legitimacy. So basically, if you are, so gay marriage is affiliative legal alliance that you are demanding for, or that somebody is demanding for. The sexual practice and relationship which falls outside then becomes illegitimate. So if you are polyamorous, if you are single mother, if you choose not to have a partner and live on your own, or engage in multiple relationship, or you have a polygamous relationship, all of this then immediately becomes illegal. So it not only creates the legitimacy and illegitimacy, but also it's creating certain kind of hierarchies. The hierarchies not only enforces the distinction between the legitimate and illegitimate queer lives, but they produce tacit distinction among the forms of illegitimacy. So so that is something that is dangerous, because it's not about who has a right to exist or who doesn't have the right to exist, or who is legitimate, who's more legitimate than other, but also it creates hierarchies within the queer community itself. If legitimate alternative for now is constitute sexual possibilities that will never be eligible or translation into legitimacy, there are possibilities that become increasingly disregarded within the sphere of politics as a consequence of the priority that marriage debate has assumed. So there's a certain normative crisis ensues. On one hand, it is important to mark how the field of intelligibles, speakable sexuality is circumscribed, so that we can see how option outside the marriage are becoming foreclosed and unthinkable. That is something that one need to. On the other hand, there is always the possibility of savoring the status of unthinkability. If it is the status as the most critical, the most radical, the most valuable. But how does one think politics from such a site? Unrepresentability. And in case I'm not misunderstood here, or like Butler is saying that in case she's not misunderstood, then it's a pressing question. How can one think politics without considering these sides of unrepresentability? So basically, whatever side you choose, it has pro and con. I mean that is like as simply as I can put. The very perspective of becoming political depends on our ability to operate within the discursively instituted binary, and not to ask or endeavor not to know that the sexual field is forcibly constricted through accepting those terms. So what they are trying to say is that our silencing or not questioning how these orders are becoming orders, how this legitimation, why this legitimation is so important, or if the legitimation happens, or if the marriage is recognized, what kind of hierarchies it would produce, what kind of discrimination it would produce, or what kind of exploitation it would produce, and how state would intervene into the community. Those are the questions we try to avoid, because we don't want to critically engage. We think, like at least people who have been fighting for gay marriage, right? They think that's like that one recognition at a time. But for Butler, it is not about the recognition, but how you're recognized and what kind of hierarchies it is producing, and what kind of possibilities it's foreclosing. That is something that one need to question, because it is not about like homosexual marriages are it's aping the heterosexual model in some sense, is that you are copying the heterosexual model, but in heterosexual model you have the right to adoption, right to have children, right to have nurture, you have right to build your own kinship, not like you are embedded in a kinship network, but here those resources you are pulled away from those resources that is offered by your community. There's certain kind of practices that you engage with, and that kind of cements your relationship within your community. And those are the things that is no longer possible once you are state recognized. Your marriage is state recognized. So what is important to remember is that there is not site of enunciation, but shifts in the topography from which questionably audible claim emerges, the claim of not yet subject and nearly recognizable. These are the sites of uncertain ontology, difficult nomination, if it seems that that Butler is not arguing for or against should be pursuing and celebrating sites of uncertain ontology and difficult nomination. They actually having a very difficult position, and the position is simply is that what you I think to summarize the position is that one can this recognizability may open the door for a hospital, may actually allow us to stand next to our beloved friends dead bed, but it also creates a major problem. One can see the terrain of dilemma here as one hand, living without the norms and recognition results in significant sufferings. So if you don't have the recognition, you do have significant sufferings, forms of disenfranchisement and confounded very distinction among the psychic, cultural, and material consequences. So you actually suffer from these consequences. On the other hand, the demand to be, if the gay marriage demand is recognized, which is very powerful political demand, can lead to new and individuous form of social hierarchy, to a participation foreclosure of sexual field, to new ways of supporting the extending state power if it does not instituting a critical challenge to the very norms of recognition supplied and required by the state legitimation. So so basically, whatever position you choose, you are essentially withholding some of the rights that should be yours automatically, and children becomes the martyr of this kind of rights. And one of the things is that, like, of course, being homosexual is difficult. Being living in a queer life is difficult in a heteronormative world. There's no question about it. And there are, if you don't have the minimum recognition, then it impacts you emotionally, psychologically, legally, and culturally. But at the same time, when you have those recognition, that means you are accepting accepting the clauses provided by the marriage. So anything outside the marriage, as any relationship outside marriage, is becomes illegitimate automatically, or it doesn't recognize the lives of non-monogamous people who live alone, or whatever arrangement there might be. So that is clearly it's basically preferring one group of queer people over other, their desire over other. And also, in the name of our desire and our recognition, we are actually, not we, but whoever is fighting for the cause, you are actually extending the state's desire for you to be monogamous and heterosexual, if not heterosexual, at least married, so that state can recognize you as a dyad. So that is the argument she makes, and they make. So rest of the things are actually back and forth rebuttal between two, the French scholar and her position. So I'm not going to go really deep into it. So in previous section, we talked about Butler's position and why gay marriage or kinship always assumed or emulate the heterosexual norms, and how state desires that. We talked about that. So next article is titled as Alternative Kinship, Marriage and Reproduction by Nancy 11. This one is a very straightforward argument, because I chose this article as a pair because one is asking the philosophical question, what is right and what rights are more right, or rather, even when you think those like the rightful demand can actually circumcise someone else's rights and their vision of what kinship should be for them, and in order to achieve state recognition. So this one is actually talking about what are the alternative kinship and how it works. So basically, it starts from where Pellet's work ends. Kirsten's work ends, where it talks about the Schneider's kinship form and focus in functions, social structure, rules, and types of societies he studied, and problem with the kinship study, and what kinship relationship means to people from Kirsten. His influence with, so basically this discussion and how it impacted American anthropology, and how Euro-American anthropology societies took Schneider's work very seriously, and there was a lull period of not studying kinship that much. And one of the major things that Schneider talks about is that biogenetic substance, the kinship based on biogenetic substance, enduring diffused solidarity. This element provides the basis for three categories: relative by blood, in law, and nature. So these are the derived from master symbol of sexual intercourses linked parents to their children and husband to their wife. Not surprisingly, as subsequent research has shown that broad generalization do not fit American or all classes, ethnicities, and sexual identities equally well. So we see in end of Pellet's work, there's a mention of alternative kinship and what kind of new kinship that is emerging. So suggests that kinship was a figment of anthropological imagination, an artifact of bad theory. So that is Schneider was talking about. And Pellet's actually showed that even if that was bad theory, there are new kind of kinship that was possible. And he actually, Pellets and Stones talks about this alternative kinship, which Ledwin picks up. So what we see is that, so Lenwin is talk about this alternative kinship, marriage, and reproduction, and what are the precedents that existed. So in American Family, Stacy describes revolution in domestic life, and that was generated by diverse social and economic changes in American societies. These changes undid the prototypical modern family, self-contained nuclear household units, and complementary male and female role. So these new families are talking about the complementary male and female role and equality in partnership. But this alternative characterized by Stacy as postmodern have now become the part of this mainstream. They include the family headed by never married or divorced mother, unmarried couple raising children, families which more gender egalitarian roles, gay and lesbian families. So these are the array of different kind of family and different kinds of kinship that entails. The rarity of ethnographic cross-cultural literature featuring kinship alternatives may be due to earlier preoccupation with non-normative and conventional study of kinship. But it took Goff's feminist reanalysis of Evan Pritchard's material in Noir Life, and she draws attention to the type of marriage that provided the option for to women in the society, including women marriage and ghost marriages, women leaving husband for lovers. And all this reanalysis also called into the question of Evan Pritchard's elegant model of social structure based on patrilineal descent. Because within that patrilineal descent, these marriages existed, these women existed. Many of these alternative practices in pre-industrial societies had the strategies of heirship. So it provided good old social security of heirs, conjugal relationship to enhance women's status, women marriage, which was widespread in Africa, seems to have produced both results. So it kind of it enhances women's position, but at the same time, it also secure the air. So women marriage, one is husband, one is wife, which emulates the heterosexual marriage. So a woman who's considered as a socially male or husband cannot bear children. So if he, socially constructed, he is marrying another woman, so this both women, the other woman would is allowed to have lover and have child, but that child would be considered, this women who are married together, their child. So the inheritance is ensured, but also this gives a relative freedom to women who were not previously married, couldn't be married, or who actually wanted greater sexual freedom. So individual can manipulate the range of options available for them to secure personally desirable marriage and familial arrangement. So this is something that we see in the women to women marriage. Canton Delta and China, there are cases of marriage avoidance. In Tibetan cases, there are marriage avoidance, but also in case of hijras or Bangladesh, American Indian Bangladesh, men who identify as women are marrying other women, and they are considered as their husband. So these are the socially recognizable practices that happen in non-Western societies. In European societies also have this alternative arrangements. One example is agreed upon is celibate marriage, sometimes for the duration of child marriage and sometimes after the birth of the children, reportedly exercised for the ascetic spiritual purpose. This practice seemed to have suspended the gender inequality of traditional marriage. Another example of same-sex union is solemnized by clergy and publicly celebrated. The ceremonies involve some of this same activity found in heterosexual wedding. It is not clear whether those unions were always sometimes sexual in nature, but clearly entailed the intended lifelong commitment between two friends. So these and of course there mid 19th century United States produced variety of kinship. So shacks, onidas, complex marriages or community-based marriages, but also Mormon marriages, which is extremely Mormon polygamous marriages, and not only the marriages, but the kibbutz system, where collective social and economic experiment was done, and children were raised not by their parents, but by their nurse and governess who could take care of them. So there are alternative family form, not only alternative family form, but also different kinds of kinship that existed in Western and non-Western societies. So how then gay and lesbian families reconfigure their families among them. So new kinship practice forged by gay men and lesbian women have attracted growing scholarly attention in recent decades. So theoretically, what Western's Family We Choose is a book which departs from Schneider's model, and actually she notes that relationship that lesbian and gay men recognize fit uneasily into Schneider's typology of related to blood and marriage by natural substance or code of conduct, but by core symbol of heterosexual or by heterosexual intercourses. She stated that gay Americans have contested assumption that family must be defined by the basis of the genetic and reproductive sexuality, and have created an alternative kinship paradigm distinctive of family type, that is chosen family. So from one perspective, chosen family provides support, surrogate kin ties, in that they entail enduring diffuse solidarity. Thus, they are modeled after the conventional meaning that surrounds kinship in American culture. Cat Weston describes chosen family, not surprisingly, a fluid network, and individuals who are easily replaced by the personal choice and the circumstances. Lovers and friends are considered as kin. Metaphoric extension and there's a metaphoric extension. Weston also noted that although there is a lesbian baby boom, have provided another way of challenge the certainty of heterosexual intercourse as a two-person opposite to gender model of parenthood. Having babies involve incorporation of ideas about biological ties and parentage. In Carrington's work, we see that everyday life of household of a lesbian, bisexual, and gay families define people who engage in consistent and reciprocal pattern of loving, caring activities. He noted, however, that many individuals lack the time, money, and personal network to create alternative family based on choice, and the ethnic variation is very important here. So according to him, African American, Asian American, Latina, or lesbian gay men in the sample maintain strong connection with their birth relatives, and partly because they were less mobile and they were living close by. So the same-sex couple are egalitarian because of the lack of fixed roadmap for their deviation of domestic labor. One person having better paid, but there is also hierarchy as well. So however, one partner having a better paid or more demanding job may create inequitable situation. Carrington found these conditions to be ideologically fraught, that people nearly universally asserted splitting domestic work 50-50, even where he found that evidence of differentiation and equality in their domestic lives as well. So alternative models of parenting, and some studies on lesbian mothers. In the past, when adoption was not a realistic option, the new reproductive technologies were less advanced and less widely available. Most lesbian women and gay men became parents in heterosexual relationship. Levin begins her research at the time when lesbian women were losing custody of their children in contentious divorce cases. Thus, her goal was to show that these women were as devoted and competent as heterosexual mothers, and their identities as mothers superseded an identity based on sexual orientation. She found lesbian mothers maintaining ties with their birth kin, with their father and their children for a betterment with their children's circumstances and provide biological mooring. In more recent years, many lesbian women have used donor insemination to have children, ways to maximize biogenetic within their families and that approximate such type. A woman may use the same donor for all their children so that the children can be genetically linked to each other. Gay men have more limited choice of adoption, and which is costly and complex process of surrogacy. And we see that in Benkov has noted the family of created both challenge and mimic conservative cultural model of gender parent-child relationship. Yet Hick has argued that their seemingly contradictory views on the family may simply evolve divergent response of different situation. Lesbian women and gay men, for example, more likely to voice conventional family values when applying for foster or to adopt children, to voice more radical views when consider new identities and community of support. So dual mother in a lesbian relationship, women sought equal involvement in their child caring, try to be in, have relationship, dual mother families also try to have this tie in a non-birth mother for second parent adoption. And also many of these women choose to expand their children kin network with a member of the sperm donor's family and other lesbian co-parent families who have used the same donor. So same-sex marriage, um, uh, actually an elementary structure presumes that male-dominated heterosexual marriage exchange is misrecognition of women's marital right and strategies and distortion of imposes matrilineal societies, and mossos uh, have non-cultural, non-exclusive conjugal relationship. So there are, and there's like a long list of marriages which are same-sex marriages, and house data are drawn from the public document and interviews which individual who participated in the public commitment ceremonies. What she concluded is that this couple draw heavily from the widely shared cultural meaning and often use traditional symbol of marriage to mark their relationship. She found the class, gender, and previous marital history to be correlated with the decision to hold a public commitment ritual. This diverse gay relationship model have been described as involving complex layering of gender signifiers and have been influenced by shifting fashion of gay identities over past half century, which we have discussed in Butler's book. Impact of new reproductive technology. This is a long one, but this NRT includes discussion of how women personally experience this procedure, and which these are arduous, stressful, which often explicitly inexplicable fail also, right? For many cultural contexts, egg and embryo donation raise fewer problems than does sperm donation because of their ideal about the experience of birth and maternal bonding during the pregnancy. Cultural construction of gender also affects the idea of egg and sperm donation. In Britain and United States, sperm donation is seen as sexualized, perhaps because of the donation process generalized, whereas egg donation is asexual and altruistic. Response to surrogacy. Surrogacy was utilized as a far back as biblical time when so the surrogacy is another method where especially gay men could have children, and surrogacy program employs surrogates, and the couple highlights those aspects of surrogacy that are consistent with the controversial reproduction and American kinship ideology. So the stress is social motherhood, which was seen in a comprising intentionally choice and nurturance, and more importantly, the biological motherhood. Nonetheless, some of the mothers reported that lack of physical tie with their child as creating a sense of exclusion, which echoes the importance of bilateral ties of American kinship. There are also economic aspect of medicalized reproduction. NRT began concerns have been raised about ways in which this technology is introduced and issues commerce into what formerly known as a private family affair. So NRTs are seen as a breaching the divide between the act undertaken for love and act undertaken for money. So between public domain and self-interested commerce and the private domain of generalized reciprocity. So there are many pro and con argument, but one of the good thing about this is that we see Khan's work where he argues that infertile couple or single woman decision to use NRT does not evolve out of consumerist impulse, but out of the desire to have children and meet the social and religious expectation to be fruitful and multiply. So in NFTs are it's now global technology, and technology transfers makes it meaningful. So in Khan's work extension, we see that Israeli government, the medical experts, and the sermons by the rabbi are talking in favor of NRT, and that is making many single women to become mother for the first time in their lives. Another example would be cultural model of kinship affecting utilization of NRT found in Sri Lanka. Infertile couple regularly ask for the sperm of their close relative, usually husband's brother, to achieve pregnancy. An infertile man requesting to use his brother's sperm is antithetical to European American thinking, but it also accepts the Sri Lanka as a light of attitude of persisting for the tradition of polyandrous marriages. In China, where the array of NRT is available, positive attitude towards technology and modernity have contributed to view that technologically assisted conception can create superior offspring. So there's a eugenics in action there. Now, there are many loopholes in practice of disclosure. Parents available, like parents who avail these technologies try to keep silent about these technologies. The concealment is not only happens when there's artificial insemination, or even the cases, legitimate cases like IVF, parents actually decide not to talk about it. And some of this non-disclosure is also linked to men and masculinity or femininity, where when you are not being fertile, you are considered as emasculated, or not being fertile, not like socially reproductive. So telling children how they were conceived makes a I mean, it can make positive contribution, not by telling it, but and in many cases, donor of the in Great Britain, the children, when they become 18, they can access to the information of their genetic information, but they don't have the right to identify, like look for the identity of the donor. So these efforts are kind of show the persisting cultural emphasis on biogenetic connection of Euro-American and other societies as providing a basis for common identity, as conferring irrevocable kinship, and offering a relationship that anthropologists have described as a entailing enduring solidarity and perspective of altruism. So I'll end the discussion here, and we can talk more about this in class. Thank you.